Welcome to the Radiant Visalia podcast. Join us at one of our two services, 9 a.m. and 10:45 a.m. Download the Church Center app or visit our website, radiantvisalia.com, to stay connected with us. All right, enjoy.
There is a heavenly city that I'm compelled to find.
Good morning, church. Today's reading is in Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 20. You have Bibles located under the seats in front of you, and if you don't own a Bible, feel free to take one of those home with you as a gift from Radiant. So, Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 20. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. And Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good that we are here. If you wish, I will make 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces and were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Rise and have no fear." And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Tell no one of the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." And the disciples asked him, "Then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come?" He answered, "Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them of John the Baptist. And they came to the crowd. A man came up to him and kneeled before him. He said, "Lord, have mercy on my son, for he has seizures and he has suffered terribly. For often he falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not heal him." And Jesus answered, "O faithless and twisted generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Why could we not cast it out?" He said to them, "Because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like the grain of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it'll move, and nothing will be impossible for you."
You can be seated. I'm going to start with a question this morning. When I say power, what comes to mind for you? Maybe not just like what thoughts come into your head, but how does the word power make you feel? How do you experience that word? I'm sure some of you might have a political party or maybe even a position come to mind. Maybe I say power and you think engine. Maybe I say power and you think, well, it's got to be a spiritual kind of answer because we're in church, so you just think Jesus. Jesus is probably the answer. Maybe you're thinking that your cell phone's about to die. Maybe you're thinking, I better get solar on my house before next summer. I have no idea what comes to mind when I say power. But I want to assert something this morning. And that is that I think because power has so often been abused, we think it's something we can't pursue. I want to say and suggest this morning that when I say power, we have mostly negative connotations with that word. Is it a good or a bad thing? Power, authority, is it a good or a bad thing? And we would all say it's both. It's neutral. You can use it for good. You can use it for bad, but I want to say, because it's been abused, that most of us say it's something that we just can't pursue. Is it a gift from God, or is it a curse? Is it okay to desire power and authority? Is it okay to want power? Isn't that, if you want power, isn't that a good sign that you shouldn't have power? If you're into authority, isn't that a good sign that you probably shouldn't have a place of authority? Is it okay to ask for it? Is it okay to need it? I spent my week inside this text, and the last section really landed on me as a man brings his son, who's throwing himself into the fire, who's oppressed, possessed by demons. And the disciples ask, why didn't we have the power to cast it out? Why were we unable to meet the needs that were coming our way? And we'll end there. We'll end there this morning, just asking for God to fill us afresh with power. But before we do that, I want to frame our pursuit of power by looking at this passage. I want to look at what Jesus has to say, what the scriptures have to teach about power before we pursue it. But know this, that you probably don't think it's something that you could come here this morning and ask for. And we've got to get past that and ask, fill me afresh with power. I need power to meet the needs that surround me. I mean, think of it this way. There's going to be an altar call. Just letting you know right now, there's going to be an altar call. And if you were to come forward and you were to say, hey, can you pray for me, Trav? I'd say, yeah, what do you want me to pray for? And if you said, I just need contentment, I just need endurance, I just need peace in this moment, I would think, hey, that sounds so spiritual, and I have no problem agreeing with you for those things. But if you came forward and you said, hey, Trav, I want you to pray for me, and I said, what for? And you said, I want to be clothed with power from on high, I'd be like, you've watched too many Marvel movies. Like, is that what you watched last night? Go sit down, Thor, and come back when you want to be like Christ. You know, this is our attitude. Know it. It exists. It's there. This is our attitude when it comes to power, which is so interesting because this is exactly what Jesus says and promises. He says, wait, I don't want you to do anything. Don't do anything until you're clothed with power from on high. The church is born, and it's born out of this promise. Oh, you'll receive power. You will receive the promise of my Father, and there will be an explosion that can't be contained. You will be my witnesses to the ends of the earth because what's about to come upon you. We've been promised power and promised authority. This is true, but it sounds so strange to us because our experience is that we're powerless. What we're more in touch with is our weakness. Few of us are here this morning feeling like we're reigning in life, right? But you have not been given a spirit of fear, but power and love and a sound mind. And yes, power, when it is divorced from love and a sound mind, is a terrible evil. We've experienced it, and the scriptures testify to that well. But power, when connected to love and a sound mind, is an amazing thing, an attractive thing, not just a biblical thing, but a beautiful thing. It's a Jesus thing. He has this, and people are drawn to him. We're drawn to him for this reason. So I want to ask this morning for fresh power, but only after I frame up kind of the power we want to pursue. Is that okay? Can I get you into this? And will you, by the end of this, ask for fresh power? You're like, I don't know. It depends on how good the sermon is. Okay, here we go. At the mountaintop, we read that Jesus' power is revealed. And then as Jesus makes his way down the mountain, he has a conversation with his disciples about power and suffering. And then as they get to the bottom of the mountain, they're met with the need of the crowd. And Jesus, again, he operates in power. So I want to give us a framework for the power we want by using this sentence. Jesus is the source of power. Suffering is by the side of true power, and true power operates with others in mind. This is what we're going for. This is what I want to set before you. So Jesus is the source. The power of Jesus is revealed here on the Mount of Transfiguration. So this power story starts where every good power story starts, on the top of the mountain. And many notable things happen on a mountaintop, right? Where were the 10 Commandments given? Mountaintop. Where did Moses see a cloud? And where did he encounter God and see him face to face? And Moses came down with his face shining. Where did that happen? On Mount Sinai. The most famous sermon ever given that we studied earlier in Matthew, where was that given? It's the Sermon on the Mount. The Great Commission will come to the disciples at the end of Matthew, and it'll come from a mountaintop. But here we have what is famously called the Mount of Transfiguration. And it's not here that Jesus is changed into something else. It's that who he is on the inside is revealed on the outside. For a moment, his face flashes. And there's much that we can learn from this, but the first thing I want to point to is that Jesus is the source of power and authority. Jesus is being established here as the authority in the house. So it says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and he led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. And his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. And behold, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah, talking with them. And Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it's good that we're here. If you wish, I'm going to make 3 tents here. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. He was still speaking when, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. I read that kind of like God's irritated. I don't know if he is. I would imagine he is. When the disciples heard this, they fell on their faces. They were terrified. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, rise, have no fear. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Who Jesus is being put on full display. Nowhere in the Gospels does Jesus glow and shine like this. And it's saying something to us. There's many things we could unpack. I just want to highlight a few of them by asking this question. Why were Moses and Elijah there? Why were they a part of this? Why were Peter, James, and John there? What were they supposed to get or grasp through seeing Jesus' face change like this? So first, why Moses and Elijah? Why are they up there? Why do they appear? It'd be easy for us to say today that Jesus is superior to Moses and Elijah, right? Even if you're new to church, you know, no, those are probably great guys, but they don't belong in the same category as Jesus. He stands alone. And when we say that, we mean no disrespect to Moses. We mean no disrespect to Elijah. Amazing men, miracle workers, leaders. They led the people of God. But it would be easy for us to say, you don't compare Moses and you don't compare Elijah to Jesus. He's unique. But what about for the earliest followers and the new Christian community that was being formed by Jesus? Would they have understood Jesus to be completely unique and in a category of his own? Well, think of it this way. Moses and Elijah, they both received revelation from God. They both met with God on mountaintops. Moses and Elijah both did miracles, not just Jesus. Moses and Elijah both confronted tyrants, not just Jesus. Moses and Elijah both led the people of God and spoke the words of God, not just Jesus. But the point of the transfiguration is clearly just Jesus. Just Jesus. When those disciples look up, they see Jesus only. He's in a category all of his own. So God's command to hear Jesus, when God says, listen to him in the presence of Moses and Elijah, he's doing a few things. But the first thing you need to know is he's saying, that's my boy, and the buck stops with him. Jesus is being established in authority here. That's part of what's happening as this voice sounds from heaven. And says, this is my precious son. This is my priceless son. Jesus is not just special for us. Jesus is special to God. The voice is a declaration of who Jesus is to God and who Jesus is to us as the church. So this is what is happening here, is saying there is no rival. Don't we sing that? You have no rival. You have no equal. You aren't to be even compared to Moses and Elijah, right? So we're saying Jesus is unique and Jesus stands alone, but at the same time, having Moses and Elijah there is creating continuity between the Old Testament and the story of Israel and all that God has done in the past through the law and the prophets, and it's creating continuity with the new community that Jesus is gathering in the new covenant. So some of what is happening here with having Moses and Elijah in the mix is that we are to see, and the disciples were to see certainly, that the Old Testament and the New Testament sing a duet. They harmonize with one another. As we say that Jesus stands alone, we're not saying that Jesus stands apart from the Old Testament. There's not a comparison happening here like the ancient written word of God with all its traditions and redemptive history and the newly risen, revolutionary Christ who stands alone. This is, in fact, harmony. This is a duet. This is the ancient word of God pointing to God's chosen son. That is what's happening here. That's just a few of the reasons Moses and Elijah are in the mix. What about Peter and James and John? Why'd they get the invite? Jesus took them up there. It wasn't that they were like, no, we're going with you. You can't leave us home. We're demanding that we make this trek with you. No, Jesus says, I want you to come with me. And in some ways, the transfiguration happened for them. In some ways, they were supposed to be there and witness it. So what's happening here? Well, it's been 6 days. 7 days since Mike's preach, where he talked to us about what Peter did and said. When he said, no, I would skip the cross if I were you, Jesus. And then Jesus said what? Get behind me, Satan. It's been a rough week for Pete. And you better believe it's a 6-day hike. And you don't do a lot of talking on a hike because you're out of breath. Have you ever noticed that? Everything is real quiet, real quick. But they're making this trek. Jesus has invited them to go. And certainly Peter is doing what we all would be doing, right? Stupid. That was stupid. Just kicking himself. Why did I do it? You probably did it during the meet and greet. Dumb. Why did I say that? They said, what's up? And I said, pretty good. That's not quite right. They said, how's it going? And I said, nothing much. It's dumb. It was dumb. Why did I ask if they lost weight? They haven't lost weight. Why did I ask them if it was their first Sunday? They've been here for 8 years. This is stupid. Why did I say what I said? He's kicking himself, for sure. He's kicking himself, and he's probably thinking, oh man, if I get another chance, I'm not going to do that again. He's vowing inwardly, if I get a chance, I'm never going to ask a woman if she's pregnant ever again in my life. For as long as I live, so help me God. I won't ask if someone's pregnant. Stupid. We know he's been thinking about, man, if I get another chance, because he gets another chance here, right? And I love how it starts. He starts it with Lord. I mean, he's done some thinking about his approach, and he's got another take, right? He starts with no, certainly you can't do this. He's like, Jesus, last time I was out in front of you, next time I take my place, Lord. It's like when my kids come to me and they start with Father, and I'm like, what the heck? What's about to happen? Lord, Peter says, I'm going to do it differently this next time. Lord. It is good for us to be together. It's so great. What sweet fellowship we've enjoyed here, Lord. Then he launches into, if it be thy will. It's awesome. What's more spiritual than that? Last time I recognize I got out ahead. If it be thy will. And then he says, I'll probably make tents here. I'm going to make us some tents and some tabernacles. And then here's the ultimate. He says, first for you, Jesus, right? Because the point of this passage is Jesus stands alone. So of course, first for you. And then for your buddies who are also here, Moses and Elijah. I'll make you guys something. I love this. This is such just a classic tendency in us, and especially in us as leaders, just to think that the mission is based on doing and not first listening. Like it's like, you just got to do something. You got to fix it. You got to move. You can't just listen. And so Peter, he represents us so well, doesn't he? Thank God for Peter. This is might be the right answer, just the wrong time, right? And that's evidenced by, the voice cutting him off. And essentially, last week, it's the Son of Man saying, get behind me, Satan. This week, it's God saying something along the lines of shut your yapper, stop talking, which had to be what James and John were thinking of too, right? Like, why? Why are you talking again, man? The rest of us are listening and you can do it too, but you're not, you're talking. And I wish you wouldn't do this. Close your mouth. But why? Why are these guys up this hill? Well, they need what we need. They need to hear the voice of the Father validate specifically Jesus' plan to go to the cross. They need to hear the voice validate Jesus' plan going forward. And these three need to see that face flash in glory because they're about to see that face be marred beyond recognition. They need a glimpse, and they graciously get a glimpse to keep them moving, which leads me to my next point. The first is that Jesus has all authority, and the way he works with power is the way we should work with power. But the second thing is that Jesus seems to suggest that power actually has suffering by its side, which is something that most of us really struggle with. So they're coming down from the mountain, and Jesus commanded them, hey, tell no one the vision, okay? I mean, maybe Jesus trusts Pete with this, but I don't know. He's like, don't talk about this, okay, until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. And then the disciples asked him, then why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come? And he answered, Elijah does come, and he will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they didn't recognize him, but they did to him whatever they pleased. So also the Son of Man will certainly suffer at their hands. And then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them about John the Baptist when he was speaking about Elijah. So here's the scene. They're making their way down from the mountaintop because everyone's got to come down from an encounter. And as they're making their way down, they're thinking, we just saw the Son of Man and we just saw his coming kingdom. That's what we just saw. But we've been told as good Jewish boys that before we see the Son of Man and him come and all his power and his kingdom, Elijah is going to return. That's how the Old Testament ends. Malachi 3 ends with the promise that Elijah will return. And so to this day, the Jewish community, the Orthodox Jewish community at Passover will actually open the door during the feast. And that is a way of welcoming Elijah. That's a way of saying, we're ready. We know that before this whole thing happens, there's going to be an opening act, and that opener is Elijah. And so we're saying, send the opener because we're ready for the Messiah to come. And so they're asking the question, hey, I thought before this, we were going to see this. And as we just saw Elijah, is that what we saw? And Jesus essentially says to them, because they're essentially saying, did we miss something? Did we miss something? What about those prophecies at the end of the Old Testament? And Jesus says, yeah, you did miss something. You did miss it. John the Baptist arrived to do this work, and you missed it. And you missed it for a few reasons. But the biggest one is that your ideas about John and your ideas about me have not included any sort of suffering or defeat. And we can look down on them like, oh man, this is so easy to get. But it's not, is it? The idea of a God who would deal with suffering through suffering, well, I get frustrated with that God as well. The idea of a God who's going to deal with death through dying, that's a little bit hard to get your head around. So Jesus is essentially saying God is working, and he's working through suffering. And because he's working in unconventional ways through suffering, yeah, I do think you missed it with John because he was doing the work of Elijah. John as Elijah and Jesus as the Messiah might be missed if your idea of power doesn't include the cross before the crown. Well, that's what's happening here. Jesus is essentially saying right here in the middle, my kingdom's going to come on two mountains. This is a tale of two mountains here. Jesus is connecting the Mount of Transfiguration to the Mount of Crucifixion. He's connecting Mount Hermon, we think, to the Mount of Calvary. And he's saying, if you're going to get me and you're going to get my mission, you're going to have to hold these two mountains in tension. In order to understand Jesus, sure, you're going to have to understand the Mount of Transfiguration. What we just read, Jesus is revealed in glory. But also you need to know on Mount Calvary that Jesus will be reviled in shame. On the Mount of Transfiguration, he's clothed in white, right? Bright like the sun, a reference to Daniel 7. And on Mount Calvary, he's stripped bare, he's exposed, and he bleeds out. On the Mount of Transfiguration, he has Moses and Elijah by his side. What incredible company. What a small group. On Mount Calvary, he'll be flanked by two criminals. On the Mount of Transfiguration, we read about a bright cloud. At Calvary, it's complete darkness. On the Mount of Transfiguration, Pete fires up. He's like, let's never leave here. We'll tent camp. I never want to leave this place, Jesus. Can't believe what's happening here. On Mount Calvary, Peter's nowhere to be found. He flees the scene and says, I can't believe what's happening here. On the Mount of Transfiguration, God's voice is loud. Listen to him. On Mount Calvary during the crucifixion, God is silent and Jesus is screaming loud, "Why have you forsaken me?" And Jesus says, "You're going to miss me if you miss this." That right alongside of this glory, there is suffering, and they're not at odds with one another. They're connected to each other. And so the mystery of me is revealed in these two mountains. And we don't emphasize Christ crucified at the expense of his risen power, and we don't focus on his risen power at the expense of understanding that that comes to and through the cross. There is a cross that comes before the crown, and if you don't know that, you're going to miss John, and unfortunately, you're going to miss me. True power has suffering by its side, and true power operates with others in mind. Read this last section with me. So they're getting a little lesson on what they just saw. They get to the bottom of the mountain. And when they got to the crowd, a man came up to them, and kneeling before him, they said, "Lord, have mercy on my son. He has seizures and he suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples and they could not heal him." And Jesus answered, "O faithless and twisted generation, how long? How long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me." This is the same phrase that he uses, by the way, for the fish and the loaves. When they're like, "We can't do it." And he's like, "Yeah, bring it to me." This is exactly what's happening. We can't do it. Bring it here to me. And Jesus rebukes the demon, and it came out of him, and the boy was healed instantly. And the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Hey, why can we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "Because your little faith, for truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it'll move, and nothing will be impossible for you." We know that the power that we're pursuing is hopefully not for our selfish end. I don't know if you guys, I was thinking about Bruce Almighty when Jim Carrey is given God's power, and the first thing he goes to work doing is just completely selfish things, right? The power that we're pursuing is for the sake of others and for the sake of the world. So it's sourced in Jesus. It has suffering by its side, and it's for the sake of the crowd. It's what we're after. And I was really captured by this end here. Because, of course, this is about prayer. And Jesus isn't saying, "Hey, if you have a mountain of prayer, then you can move a mountain of circumstances." No, he's saying, if you've got a little, God can do a lot. If you've got a little, God can do a lot. And the beginning of this story about power starts with listen to him. If you're going to have authority, it's going to be had in submission to him. But it ends with us being told, you've got to talk to him. So there is a moment to pray, and there's a moment to pray with faith. We receive power by hearing from him, but then we're told he wants us to talk to him on the behalf of others. And what really grabbed me in this text, and there's so much we could talk about, worship team, would you come? And maybe the ministry team, would you guys come as well this morning? The key to understanding this text is actually this word unable. Stick with me here just for a few seconds. Probably minutes, with a few seconds. I want to overpromise and underdeliver. But the key to this text is this word unable. And you're thinking to yourself, the word unable actually doesn't appear in the text, and it doesn't appear in this translation, but this is the word. The Father comes and says, your disciples were unable to help. Then the disciples respond and say, it's true. Why were we unable? And then the text ends with this. It ends with the disciples being instructed and told by Jesus, with faith and prayer, nothing will be unable for you. And I found myself thinking this week about the many times as a pastor that people and situations are brought to me and I often feel unable. And I don't say that in the meeting, but I make my way to a quiet place, maybe a moment with Jesus, and I say, why am I unable? Why am I unable to make a difference in this situation? Why, as I pray, do people continue to be sick? And why, as I meet with couples, do they continue on the road to divorce? And why? Why am I unable to make a difference for the crowd around me? Why isn't this working? I think I got a mustard seed, man. If I didn't, I don't know if I'd be talking to you. I've got a mustard seed. You said you'd move a mountain, and I'm staring at the same situations. And I know I'm not alone as your pastor. I know there are situations, people, and circumstances coming your way, and the overwhelming feeling is I'm unable. That word unable has as its root dynamis, power. How come we don't have power to make a difference in this situation? And what I wanted to do this morning is I wanted to come to the table, of course, and remember that the mystery of Jesus is found in these two mountains. The Son of God revealed in glory and the Son of Man revealed in suffering. I don't want to divorce these two things. There's something to this. But I think the revelation of Jesus on the cross might be easier for us to grasp than his victorious power at work within us. And so what I want to do is, as you come forward, take the body of Jesus broken for you, his blood shed for you, remember his work on Calvary and even his glory on the Mount of Transfiguration. If you're here and you're in a place where you would say, I'm unable, I'm facing a mountain, and I'm unable to make things move. I've tried a bunch of different approaches to this. Nothing seems to be working. We have a team up here that's going to pray for you a really simple prayer. Come, Holy Spirit. Clothe them in power. They may say something like this: receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. And they're actually going to anoint you. They're not going to counsel you. I know you've probably shared your situation with many people, but they're going to anoint you and say, come, Holy Spirit, because we need power. And I want to ask for it this morning. As I meditated this week on this text, there's 3 areas where I feel like people were facing mountains. One was at home, specifically in relationships with home, potentially with a spouse. It could be potentially with your parents. It could be with your kids. But you're like, I've tried everything and I need power. I need power. And I felt like you were supposed to ask this morning for the Holy Spirit to intervene, maybe even in an area where you carry great shame because you've not done enough. Ask for power this morning and receive the promise of the Father. Another area is work. As I was reflecting on this passage, I was seeing people staring at mountains at work. Numbers that weren't working out, situations post-pandemic that just couldn't be solved. And I felt like the Lord was saying, ask me for power. Ask me for power. Ask me for what you're unable to do. And then lastly, to be his witnesses. I think there's a lot of people saying, I hate what's happening in the world and I want to share the hope that we have in Jesus, but I feel stuck, I feel unable, I feel captured and bound by the fear of man. And I felt like people were supposed to anoint you and pray for the power of the Spirit to come upon you. So we're going to declare and worship what is true about God and about his work and about the church. And then after you receive communion, you can make your way back to your seat, still singing. But I'd encourage you just to come right up front and wait on God. If there's not someone available, they're just going to be moving through a crowd of people. Look at that. I'm just prophesying. There'll be a crowd of people up front saying, I need power, and I'm asking for it.
Thanks for listening. We want to be a resource for you as you walk with Jesus. So please connect with us at radiantvisalia.com. Until next time.
There is a heavenly city that I'm compelled to find. Though I love the flowers and trees and smell of the grinding sea, and all the beautiful things here in life. And I'm a pilgrim here on the side of the grave,